2023 was my first year of reviewing movies, and it's been pretty fun so far. I know we're already pretty far into 2024, but I really wanted to go back to the movies of 2023 that I just really didn't have time to review, and do like a collection of little mini reviews of them all. Well, I guess my reviews are already kind of mini reviews, so micro reviews. I wanted to have this video out by the Oscars because I kind of feel like that's a pretty good cutoff point for talking about movies from the previous year. But I just didn't make the deadline, you know, adult life and all. So anyway, sorry it took this long to get this out, and this probably won't be very relevant at the time, but I enjoy making these. So here are my reviews that I missed in 2023. I know M. Night Shyamalan has a bit of a reputation.
What? No!
But I've never really followed him all that closely, so it didn't really affect my viewpoint going into Knock at the Cabin. And personally, I thought this movie was pretty good. The first thing that really stuck out to me was the sound design. Every little noise from every little movement on screen felt so visceral and real. And the characters were great too. Jonathan Groff and the husband have good chemistry, and the little girl is a great child actress. They all feel like very real people, even the crazy cultists. They really feel like actual people you could believably find in the real world, which makes it all the more impressive that each actor is able to convince you that these regular people fully believe this insane apocalypse story. Dave Bautista in particular is very engaging as the sort of reluctant de facto leader. I'm so glad he's gotten into more serious acting, because he's a treasure. Also, side note, it's great to see Ron Weasley in a movie again. I've heard he's happy being retired from acting and just living with his family or whatever, but it's great to see him pop into something small like this. Anyways, story-wise, it's also really good. I like that it's difficult for the audience to tell if this crazy story they're telling is real, all the way up to the ending. The one downside is that there is some cool mythological and biblical symbolism that I was very proud of myself for noticing, but they literally look right into the camera and explain the symbolism in detail to the audience, which is kinda lame. But to me, it didn't ruin it overall. So in the end, Knock at the Cabin? More like Gas at the Cabin. Well, that sounds dangerous. Something to know about me is that the 4 pillars of my awful personality are Disney, Pokemon, dumb Let's Plays and podcasts, and Flamin' Hot Cheetos. So I was really excited to see Flamin' Hot when it came out, but I never really got around to seeing it or reviewing it because, well, the secret 5th pillar of my personality is forgetting things. Anyway, this movie tells the story of Richard Montañez, the man who claims to have invented Flamin' Hot Cheetos. So, you know, my hero. How did he do it? Well, according to this movie and his memoir that it's based on, he noticed that his Hispanic community wasn't really into the plain cheesy flavor of plain Cheetos, cause it's just too plain. And yeah, they're right. I'm not really a fan either. So even though he was a janitor at the time, he took it upon himself to come up with a new spicy flavor, and ended up becoming an executive of the company. I really enjoyed that American dream aspect of the movie, as depressingly unrealistic as it seems now. But I like stuff like this that gives you a nice sense of hope. And on top of that, the movie does it with a lot of fun personality and, pun intended, flavor. None of this feels like how it would go in real life. It's very stylized, but that leads to all these characters having fun and likable personalities that you just enjoy watching. And funny little choices like these fake-out scenes where he recaps the events like Luis and Ant-Man, but then they just turn out to be jokes, not what really happened. Actually, a lot of people at Frito-Lay say that this story didn't happen at all. But just like those fake-out jokes, this movie is still entertaining and fun regardless. So I have to say, Flamin' Hot? More like Flamin' Gas. Almost as good as a bag of the stuff itself. So, when Disney bought Fox, one of their first decisions was to shut down Blue Sky Studios, the Fox-owned animation studio that made classics like the Ice Age movies, Robots, and the Peanuts movie. Unfortunately, that means they shut down production on another movie that was nearly complete, but thankfully, Netflix picked the project back up, and we got the great film Nimona. I am so glad this film got saved because it was fantastic. It's set in a medieval fantasy world that also has modern and futuristic technology, which is a difficult thing to make work, but they balanced it out perfectly. This world feels so real and lived in. That's probably because they've had plenty of time to flesh it out long before this movie even started production, seeing as it's based on a webcomic. And the characters are all likable, believable, and interesting. Nimona herself kind of rides the line of that "look at me, how weird and edgy I am" style of Tumblr humor, as I call it, but it never gets to the point of being annoying, as she is a fun and enjoyable character the whole time. The animation on the film is a blast to watch. It's fast and energized, but still easy to follow, which is fitting because the story also moves pretty fast. Every other scene feels like it's about to wrap the plot up, but instead another layer unfolds. It sounds like it would be random and frustrating, but it actually keeps things pretty interesting. If I had one little gripe, it would probably be that once we reach the climax, Nimona's fun personality kind of disappears. Which makes sense, it's an emotional climax, so she's not going to be as fun and energized as the rest of the film. But even once everything's resolved, for story reasons I won't spoil, we never really get her fun personality back. And I was kind of disappointed by that. But that's a nitpick. I get why they did this, it was for a good reason. So, Nimona? More like Gas Mona. Just like with the Rocky Creed series and the Fast and Furious series, this was the year that I finally got caught up on the Mission Impossible series. And honestly, it's kind of hard for me to talk about them. Not that they're bad or anything, I like them a lot, but they just kind of washed over me. I sat back, just turned my brain off, and absorbed an enjoyable experience with each one, without thinking about it too much. And I have to say, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning might be one of my favorites. I think what made this one stand out so much is definitely the mission they're tackling this time. It's shockingly relevant to real life since it revolves around the dangers of AI. In the movie, it's an AI that's achieved sentience, but as of right now, it leans closer to fiction than science. What makes this so cool to me is that it lets the AI act as one of the villains, plotting and scheming exactly like one of the human villains would, but with the entire world's information at its disposal. Pair that with a physically threatening human villain that can do its dirty work and has a tie to the main character's past, plus Palm Clementif as a French karate clown for some reason, and you've got a seriously intimidating team of villains. But the lifeblood of this franchise, its bread and butter, is the stunt work, and it is as spectacular as always. The motorcycle cliff jump is one of the coolest stunts in the series. Everything, the stunt choreography, the visual effects, and especially the sound effects, make the thrills and suspense so palpable. But that wouldn't make the film feel complete if the performances weren't great. But luckily, Tom Cruise and the whole crew is firing on all cylinders, and it's awesome to watch. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning? More like Mission Impossible Gas Reckoning. Dracula is on a boat in the hit movie Dracula on a Boat. Or The Last Voyage of the Demeter, if you're lame. Very interesting that there were two unconventional Dracula movies in the same year. I never did get around to seeing Renfield, which is kind of a shame because I wanted to do a video comparing these two, since they take such radically different approaches to the same source material. Renfield being a modern-day Marvel-style action comedy centered around a side character from the book, and this being an adaptation of the one chapter from the book where Dracula hitches a ride on a boat. I have to say, as a concept, that's very interesting, because it lets the filmmakers fill in all these gaps that were left a mystery in the book, really leaving them free to just come up with whatever they want. Now, does it live up to that really open potential? Well, it moves pretty slow, which at first is a really good thing, since they're building up the horror element. But after a while, it just kind of goes too slow, and there's nothing really all that scary about it. I wanted to be scared, but since we all know it's Dracula, and how this boat is going to end up, nothing really surprises you. This movie was directed by Andre Overdahl, who directed a Norwegian film called Troll Hunter and the film adaptation of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And what those movies had was atmosphere, and they managed to be scary, or at least more interesting because of it. This movie definitely has atmosphere. The sound and production design made me almost feel like I was on the boat, like I could practically smell the salty seawater. But that didn't really carry it, unfortunately. Because even though the boat scenes were appropriately creepy, once Dracula comes out and actually attacks, it kind of loses that. So, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, more like the mid-voyage of the Demeter. I'll go out on a limb and say it's probably better than Renfield, though. Personally, I was excited for the creator, because visually, it looked very cool. They marketed it on the fact that it was directed by Gareth Edwards, the director of Rogue One and the 2014 Godzilla. And his personal touch really shines through in this film. He has a fantastic eye for visual effects, and you can totally see that in those other movies through the sheer scale of everything. In his films, when you see something that has an immense size, you can really feel how big it is. And yet, it still feels tangible. That exact same effect came through a lot in The Creator. And on top of that, the design of the world is great. The robots and robot people have designs that look impossible, but they still come across as super real. And I like the way they inhabit this world. The machines have kind of a spiritual presence. It reminds me a lot of a Miyazaki film. After all that gushing though, I'm sad to say that I didn't really get all that sucked into this. Normally my stance is that good VFX can make up for a weak story and characters. But unfortunately in this film, it seems like the story and characters are just a bit too weak. It goes beyond weak actually and just kind of becomes forgettable. It's such a shame because I really liked the themes and ideas being discussed, like the very relevant AI topic, and the main character's discussion about heaven. But at the end of the day, I just couldn't make a connection with these characters, no matter how much I wanted to. And the story just didn't leave me thinking about much. So sadly, I have to say, The Creator, more like the mid-8er. As great as the effects look, they just don't make up for the poor story and characters for me in this particular case. I haven't seen a whole lot of Martin Scorsese's filmography, and I know a lot of you would say that I probably shouldn't even be making movie reviews since that's the case, but I know I'm going to eventually. 1, because of his amazing reputation, and 2, because I fully understand that reputation after watching Killers of the Flower Moon. This is a very long movie. Very long and very sad. Based on a book by the same name, it follows the true story of the murders of several Osage people around the 1920s that eventually led to being one of the earliest cases taken on by the FBI. The first half is hard to even consider being enjoyable, since it's such a dark dive into these heinous murders, and you just watch the culprits get away with it despite how obvious it is what they're doing. But the performances are what really pull it through. Leonardo DiCaprio is perfect as this bumbling idiot that's caught up in this evil scheme, and probably doesn't even understand all of what he's doing to his wife, even though it's right there in his face. Lily Gladstone is also great as the wife, as she gets to go through a wide range of emotions and situations that no one should ever have to go through. If I were to have one tiny nitpick about the film, it's that she kind of disappears through most of the middle of it, but the story does kind of necessitate that. And finally, Robert De Niro as the secret mastermind of these murders is just as amazing. You really do believe that the people of this town would buy him as a well-meaning, old father figure, and not want to believe what he's obviously up to. The film really gets a second wind in the latter half, as you see everything these people have been doing suddenly fall apart, because they've managed to get by with no authority figures really caring all that much up to this point. And it feels so good to see them finally get exposed for everything. It's a masterclass of storytelling, acting, everything. Killers of the Flower Moon, more like Killers of the Flower Gas. Christmas movies are great, but it's really hard to make one that becomes like a new classic. However, I think The Holdovers may have done just that, although it is hard to say whether it counts as a Christmas classic, seeing as it does take place during Christmas, but it's not super in your face about it. The Christmas setting is more just because it's essential for the setup. An unlikable jerk student and an unlikable jerk teacher at a boarding school, stuck there over break with no one else but each other. And the lunch lady. What I love about this plot is that it doesn't really follow the typical 3-act structure. It's more of this other specific type of storytelling that you don't see a whole lot in movies, but I love it when it comes up. The kind where you just sort of follow a character during a period of time in their life, whether it's a short or long one. And this one happens to be Christmas break, and the characters we follow just happen to be real buttholes, but with a little depth behind them. Like the student, for example, is a real smart aleck with a big mouth, but seeing this boarding school, you get why. But still, it gets even more interesting as the film goes on and you start to unravel more and more of what makes him who he is that goes well beyond this school. But my favorite performance of the film is Paul Giamatti as the teacher. He flips back and forth so much from being nice and respectable to an absolute psycho. but is always so articulated no matter which mode he's in. I think everyone has had at least one or probably many teachers in their life that they can see a lot of in this character. And that's the thing that makes the film so great, is everything feels so real. The dialogue is some of the most natural that I've ever heard in a movie. And every character, from the lunch lady to the other kids, feels like a real person with a real life, no matter how much or how little time the film spends on them. You take that and you add some comedy, some deep exploration of two lonely, depressed people, and you get a warm, cozy, entertaining experience that I'll be revisiting for several holidays to come. So, the holdovers? More like the gasovers. Merry Christmas. I was excited years ago when I heard that Miyazaki was coming out of retirement to make another final film, even though he'd already said the same thing about a different final film before. And look at that, he's already gone back on it and is doing another final film. Anyway, I wanted to go into this the way the people in Japan got to go into it, without knowing anything at all besides the poster and the title, How Do You Live? But then they changed that title in America to the much more boring The Boy and the Heron, and I was only able to go in sort of blind. But oh well, what did I think of the final product? I think I don't really understand it any more than I did when I only saw the poster. That is to say, this is a very esoteric movie. It's very heavy on symbolism and metaphor. There's almost nothing put into story. It kind of feels like an old man just drawing and writing whatever comes to mind for him. And sometimes that can be a bit frustrating in certain ways. Like the fact that anytime it feels like the story is starting to take a direction, it detours and instead goes somewhere completely different. And I know that makes it sound like I didn't enjoy the film, but I actually enjoyed it quite a lot. Because after a while, I stopped looking at it like it should be a coherent narrative, and started appreciating it for what it actually was. A surreal gallery of art showcasing the work of a master that's been perfecting his craft for decades. It doesn't need to make sense. It can just be a stream of consciousness, because Miyazaki has the talent to bring what's in his mind to life in a medium as difficult and niche as traditional animation, and render it beautifully. And for that reason I say, The Boy and the Heron, more like The Gas in the Heron. Before you say it, yes, Poor Things has a lot of intercourse in it. But that's definitely not all there is to this movie. It is a fascinating character study that takes place in a very well constructed, bizarre world. I'm telling you, this world is really weird. And honestly, I think it's one of the best movies I've seen to do weirdness like this. A lot of movies that try to be weird end up doing it in a way that feels obnoxiously try-hard. But it just seems to come naturally to this movie. For example, anytime Willem Dafoe's character eats, he belches out some kind of bubble that floats for a second and then pops. Why? It never gets explained, and I like that. It doesn't make sense to us, but you could see it making sense in this world. Details like that, the weird steampunkness, and all the stitched together little animals that look amazingly real, create this tangible yet alien setting. But that's just the setting. The main focus of this picture is the lead character, her journey, and what it says about society and human nature. It asks the question of, what would it be like if a person's life started out in adulthood and skipped everything before that? To put it in the least creepy way possible. This was a huge ask of an actor, but Emma Stone nailed it. She is pitch perfect all the way through a constantly evolving role. A lot of it will make you very uncomfortable, but some of it will make you laugh and give you plenty to think about concerning themes like gender roles, individuality, wealth, and, yes, sexuality. Sometimes these conversations get a little old, so if you're not in the mood to watch a movie where you'll spend most of your time thinking, which is fair, this might not be the one. For me, the heavy feeling of uncomfortableness was not my favorite, but I enjoyed the craftsmanship and the thoughtfulness of it. So, Poor Things? More like Gas Things. And that's it. Thank you guys for a fun first year, and here's hoping that the rest of 2024 is better than it's been so far. Seriously though, thank you for the views. I know it's been kind of a small first year, but I won't stop. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day. Oh yeah, I also watched Biltmore Christmas last year. I went with my girlfriend's family to the Biltmore house last year, and they told us that there was going to be a movie. It was a Hallmark movie, a Biltmore Christmas, more like a Midmore Christmas. I mean, it was fine. It was a fun little Christmas movie. It's a Hallmark Christmas movie. What do you want from me?